Go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Houston Beekeepers Association. So glad to have you this evening, that you've joined us for a really special edition with our own local guru, Ms. Mary Reed, who's going to be speaking today. So for those of you that are new to our meetings, we're going to run through a couple quick announcements. Obviously, we have a speaker here today for you, and then we'll have questions and time for discussion with Mary after her presentation. And of course, at the end of our meeting, we have some virtual door prizes, so please hang out with us until the very end to enjoy those. If you're new to HBA, just a update on what you can expect with us. We are really a community of beekeepers all across Houston, likely right in your neighborhood. And so we like to come together and support each other as beekeepers across many of the things that we do in beekeeping. Sometimes it's really nice to chat with your neighbor around what's going on with your bees, what's going on in Houston, and some of the challenges that we see over the years with beekeeping in the Gulf Coast. As part of our membership, you also get a bunch of different perks. You get access to the SCEP, which is our newsletter that we send out monthly. Of course, we have our public meeting where we always have great speakers like Mary join us every month. And we also have opportunities for members to rent some of our equipment. So as you get busy harvesting, if you're looking for extractors or other equipment that are on our rental list, you can rent those by sending a request to info@houstonbeekeepers.org. Also, we have our own swarm list. So you'll start to see there are going to be a lot of announcements around swarms. I've already gotten a couple this week. If you see a swarm and you don't want it yourself, please email info@houstonbeekeepers.org and we will get it out to our swarm list. If you want to be on the swarm list, also send us an email requesting that you're added to that particular newsletter. And essentially, whenever we hear about swarms, we will send it out to that group so you guys can go and get those if they're in your communities. So it's a great way to be neighbors here in Houston and obviously learn from the speakers that we have and the group of networking that we have here in our great town. And as you can see, it's at the very priceless amount of $25 for an individual, less for students, a little more for a family. And it's good for the whole year. All right. So I'm really excited to turn it over to Mary Reed. For those of you who have not met Mary, she has been a local resource for many years with our Texas Apiary Inspection Service. And today she's actually going to go over many of the challenges that we see in beekeeping here in the Gulf Coast, things that she commonly sees, as well as talk to you about the inspection services and our Texas Master Beekeeper Program. So I'm really excited to turn it over to Mary today.
Thanks, Sandra. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, awesome. Yeah, thanks again for the invite to come speak to you all tonight. I'm bummed that, it's virtual, but I'm hoping that in the near future, that will be the case. And that we can start seeing beekeepers and groups again in person in the future. My name is Mary Reed. I'm the current Chief Apiary Inspector for the Texas Apiary Inspection Service. A little background about me is that you may have heard this earlier, but I am originally from Florida. I got my degree in entomology from the University of Florida. After graduating, I worked for the citrus industry doing research for about 3 years, and then found out that they were hiring for an apiary inspector out in Texas. So I grabbed at that opportunity, and fortunately they hired me. I've been here for almost 7 years. I've been the chief inspector for a little over 3 years. So today I just want to start off by giving a little bit of an overview about my office, what we do, a little bit about the Texas Master Beekeeper Program, And then we'll get into some beekeeping talk, and we can go from there. So to start off, my office was first established in 1910. And the reason we were created was, at the time, there was a widespread issue with American foul brood. Beekeepers across the nation were experiencing heavy colony losses due to this disease. And so Texas and a bunch of other states enacted legislation that to create these inspection services with the purpose of controlling this foul brood disease. It wasn't until 1920 that we got our first chief inspector, and we are housed at the Texas A&M University, which is a bit unusual for a state agency. Typically, they're underneath the Department of Agriculture. But when our office was first created, the Texas Department of Agriculture did not exist. So they connected us with A&M, and it has a lot of benefits. We're located here in College Station. We're main campuses, and we have immediate access to the entomology department that's here. So if we ever have any issues that come up in the field that we can't recognize, or if there's an insect question that somebody has, we can turn to entomologists there at the department as a resource. So as I mentioned, American foul brood in the early 1900s was a widespread issue, and a lot of other states created their own inspection services for the same reason. And they were all largely successful in their efforts. And to this day, American foul brood it's still a very, can be a very problematic disease if a hive becomes infected, but we do not see it be as widespread as it once was. It's still something that we look for on inspections, but I would say for beekeepers, you're most likely not going to come across it, but it's good to know about it. Because of this, we also look for other pests and disease issues that you may encounter in a honeybee colony. So when we're out doing an inspection, we're looking for a foul brood, but we're also looking for other symptoms of pheromite damage or other various diseases that can pop up in a honeybee colony. This Apiary Inspectors of America mentioned at the bottom, this is a nonprofit organization that my office is a part of, but it is an organization comprised of apiary inspectors from across the United States, but also Canada. And so this organization, it's been really beneficial because it allows us to have really effective communication amongst the states. And if issues are coming up in different parts of the country, we basically know about it immediately. It's a really great organization, been around for a really long time, and we're really happy to be a part of it. So a few years ago, we updated our website, and at the time we decided we should put a mission statement on there. So I pulled this directly from our website. But basically, at the core of our office, our goal is to safeguard the apiary industry of Texas, and through that, an extent, the apiary industry of the United States. And we do this through the application of science-based regulations, taking advantage of educational opportunities like tonight, and then also maintaining open communication with the industry. And I don't just mean the apiary industry. We try to stay connected with other facets of the agricultural industry as a whole, because we know honeybees are really closely tied with many different parts of agriculture. So we like to, have conversations, be in communication with these different aspects of agriculture, so that, we can work towards, bettering honeybee health, really is my goal behind it. So in Texas, we have beekeeping laws, and these are the laws that my office operates under. We have copies of both of these on our website for you to read through if you so choose. Our agricultural code is Chapter 131, Bees and Honey. My office does not deal with the honey aspect. That's with the Texas Department of State Health Services. We just deal with the bee side of everything. And then we also have our administrative code, or what we call our rules, underneath our agricultural code, and that's Chapter 71, Bees. And like I said, we have those available on our website for you to check out if you're curious. So this is my office. So we are 4 inspectors for the whole state of Texas. Besides myself, we have Bill Baxter, who's my assistant chief inspector. He's been with our office for a little over 30 years. And if you haven't met him, you should take the opportunity if you can, because he is just a wealth of knowledge, not only from the beekeeping perspective, but also from a history of beekeeping in Texas. He has, over the years, has done a lot for the industry and has some great stories as a result. A few years ago, I was able to hire Hannah as an apiary inspector. And then early in March last year, I was able to hire Taylor, and she had about 2 weeks of normal onboarding, quote unquote normal onboarding experience, and then the university shut down and we all had to work from home. So she had a bit of a unique, she's been having a bit of a unique experience from the rest of us, but you know, all of them really love working with beekeepers and looking at bees and yeah, just getting out there and working with all of them. As far as inspections go, since there are just 4 of us for the whole state, we primarily conduct inspections on our migratory operations, our commercial beekeepers. We do cater to any beekeeper in the state if they need us, but typically those smaller scale operations or non-migratory operations are going to be requesting the inspection from us. So we're typically seeking out those migratory operations, not necessarily the smaller scale operations. With an inspection, what we'll do is we look at the brood in the hive, because that's where you'll see any issues come up. As a result from the inspection, if everything looks good, we can issue the beekeeper a certificate of inspection that's valid for 1 year from the inspection date. And if you're a beekeeper that's selling nukes or hives or queens, you're not required to be inspected, but if you do want to be inspected, you can make copies of your certificate of inspection and hand that out to your customers. Of course, we do an emergency inspections as needed. So from time to time, we get calls from beekeepers who are really concerned about a disease issue in their hives. And we spend time talking with the beekeeper on the phone, asking them a lot of questions about the history of that hive. We ask them to send us pictures so that we can do an initial diagnosis of the issue. And if we're concerned that there's a severe disease problem, we'll go out and do an inspection as soon as possible. We also don't charge for these inspections. Typically on a requested inspection, that's $75. That covers the entire inspection. But if it's an emergency situation, we don't want costs to be a factor. We don't want that to be a concern on the beekeeper side and hold them back from calling our office. So we just want that situation handled as quickly as possible. Talk a lot about inspections, but we do a lot more than inspections. We also participate in various different areas of research, one of which is a project called the National Honeybee Survey. It's a USDA funded grant. that Texas has been participating in since 2010. And what we do is we take specific sampling materials out on inspections and collect samples of live bees, bees and alcohol. We take debris from frames, and sometimes we'll collect samples of wax or pollen. And these samples get shipped off and analyzed for pest and disease levels, miticide resistance to miticides. They look for the presence of a novel pest called the AAA lapse mite, and then those wax or pollen samples are analyzed for pesticide residues. Data from all of the years of Texas participating, but other states participating, are available to view online. They're open to the public, and if you're a data person, this is your place. There's a lot of data there, and it's really interesting to see how trends change over time. And so if you're interested in checking that out, it can be accessed by, I would just Google search National Honeybee Survey, and it'll probably come up. We also help, we've also helped a lot of different researchers in collecting samples for their research, especially if they're needing samples from different parts of the US. Going through an apiary inspection service is a great way to access those samples, because we're pretty much always seeing beekeepers. So we can definitely provide those. We're also involved in various levels of education, whether that's providing programs or assisting with workshops, providing some sort of training, educational materials. If you've ever looked at our website, we've got a flood of materials. Hopefully it's not overwhelming, but a lot of information there. And then finally, and probably most important one to me, is that my office is a resource for beekeepers. And I don't mean specifically just coming from a pest and disease perspective, although that is what we deal with day in, day out, but also any beekeeping questions, management practices, any sort of resources that you need. If you have questions about pollinator plantings, anything, and if we can't help you directly, we can most likely get you connected with someone who can answer your questions or provide you what you need. This is our website. We have a lot of information on there. There are multiple tabs at the top. Regulations is where you'll find copies of our laws. Forms and fees is where if you're a beekeeper moving your hives around the state or in and out of the state, that's where we have all the information. There's a section for beekeepers, a section that has information specifically that wouldn't most likely be of interest to the general public. Bee removal is where we keep our list of beekeepers who conduct bee removals in Texas. And then we have a give us a buzz icon here. So if you ever have any questions, comments, a bee story, you can click on that icon, and it'll take you to a page where you can put in your name, your email address, and a message, whatever you want to send to us. So this is just showing the for beekeepers section. Lots of different information there. This one specifically came from the pest and disease section, but yeah, we have information about different management practices, testing resources. So if you ever need samples tested or honey tested, there are various different labs listed there for you to take into consideration. Some information about honey and processing honey and selling honey in Texas, and then a list of other resources that may be useful. So a little bit about the Texas Master Beekeeper Program. This is a program that we started here in Texas back in 2015. And this is a program that's in collaboration with my office and the Texas Beekeepers Association. It is based off of the very well-established Florida Master Beekeeper Program. So we figured, why reinvent the wheel when they're just so nice enough to let us kind of copy their their program. So there are a lot of similarities between the two. The purpose of the program is not to teach people how to keep bees. It's to test beekeepers' knowledge on beekeeping, bee biology, management practices, pests and diseases, so on and so forth. So it's for beekeepers that are just really, they want to learn more, like dive deeper into the details and then test their knowledge on it. If a beekeeper chooses to progress through the program, as they go through the program, there are certain requirements that they have to fulfill, one of which is called public service credits. And what these are, it's basically the beekeepers going out and talking about bees to non-beekeepers. And in extent, they become ambassadors for the industry. And this has been extremely helpful, I think, to Texas beekeeping in general, because there's my office, and then there's the apiculture professor here at A&M. So there's 5 of us, and we can't be everywhere. So it's great to have beekeepers that really love bees, but really love sharing their knowledge and passion about bees with others. We have a website as well for the program. I think my next slide has a bigger picture of it. Yes, so on there, there's a lot of information about the different levels of the program. Under these tabs, you'll see one called Apprentice, that's the first level, Advanced, Master, so on and so forth. Under these sections, there are recorded PowerPoint presentations that for people in the program are meant to be educational or good preparation for the exams, but they're open to anybody. So even if you could care less about being part of the program, that's fine by me, but I welcome you to use those resources regardless. It's there for anybody to use. We have an email listserv for the program as well, which I use to send out updates about the program, but I also use it to send out updates about educational opportunities that may be occurring in Texas, but then also ones that may be appealing to beekeepers that are happening at the national level. This gave us a buzz. It does the same thing as the one on the inspection service website. It's a quick way for you to send us an email, question, comment, whatever. So I think that is my short little spiel about my office and the Master Beekeeper Program. What we can now move into is talking about some, I think what the phrase I was given was common mistakes in beekeeping. And when I sat down to think about what I wanted to talk about here, I reflected on my first year or so of beekeeping and thinking about, what challenges did I encounter when I was first starting out? And there was a lot. So rather than talking about each individual item here, and by no means is this comprehensive, I wanted to take 3 different opportunities or challenges that are a bit more overarching. We don't necessarily get into the specifics of what some of these here are saying, but I was just kind of wanted to take a little bit more of a bird's eye view. But before I move on, I struggled with the word mistake. And I decided to take a page from an extension agent's book. If you ever hear them talk about challenges in their work or problems in their work, they never use those words. They say it's an opportunity. So I decided to change it, and we're going to call it common learning opportunities in beekeeping, because I can tell you, at least from my experience, when these things have happened to me in the future, beyond that, I made sure that that did not happen again. So I learned from my mistakes. We'll use that word one last time. So the first one I want to talk about is swarming, which is very appropriate for this time of year. It is as we all know, it's a very natural part of the honeybee colony life cycle. A lot of times people, when they think about honeybees, like the purpose of a colony, they want to say that the primary goal of a honeybee colony is to make honey. But in reality, the goal of a honeybee colony is to survive winter so that they can make it to the spring and swarm. Swarming is how they reproduce at the colony level. And we all know typically occurs in the spring, but especially here in Texas, we can see swarming happen later in the year, around the summer and even in the fall, believe it or not. So why do we want to prevent a hive from swarming? Well, for me, first and foremost, I want to control the genetics of that colony. I like to keep docile bees, and the way that I control that is knowing I purchase mated queens, and I want to make sure that that queen is in that colony. I don't want to lose her, because when a colony swarms, that queen leaves with a good cluster of workers to go find a new home, and what's left behind is still some workers, but then also queen cells that have yet to emerge, and those queen cells are going to result in a virgin queen that then has to go mate with drones in your area, and you may not know the genetics of the drones in your area unless you're a commercial beekeeper and you have thousands of colonies and you've flooded the surrounding area with your drones. For a lot of us, we just have no idea what's out there. So for me, I want to make sure that my mated queen that I spent good money on is staying in that colony. Swarming can also lead to a loss of production. So like I mentioned before, half of the colony is leaving to go find a new home. So what's left, is a smaller size colony than you had before, plus queens that have not emerged yet. And so by the time that a queen has emerged, she's become the reigning queen in the colony, warmed up her flight muscles, hardened her exoskeleton, enough to where she can go out on her mating flight, potentially more than one mating flight, come back to the hive. She doesn't start laying immediately. So it could be, at least around a couple of weeks before that queen starts laying. So you have this long delay in time where if that hive had not swarmed, they would have just continued, ideally would have continued producing brood and producing honey. Something to consider, not only if you are, your goal is to produce honey, but also if your goal is to sell bees and you're planning on making splits from that hive. If your hive swarms, you basically just lost a split for a hive that you could sell. So for the last one, I kind of took it from the perspective of a person that doesn't want to have to do anything with bees, but they end up with a colony of bees in the wall of their house. So the other downside to swarming is that, especially if you're in an urban environment, it could end up in a location that's just less than desirable for the people who live around you. So being a beekeeper means being a good steward not only to those bees, but also to respecting the people and animals that live around you. And there are definitely people that live around you who do not want to deal with bees. So the more proactive you can be about protecting people and animals from that is good. I don't know what a better word for that is. So how do we prevent swarming? Well, first, we just keep an eye out for any queen cells that are forming in the colony. You'll read in bee books that swarm cells form on the bottom of frames, which, yes, that happens, but you can also find them in the top, near the top of the frame, or even on the side of the comb, especially if you have frames that don't have plastic foundation, but you just have the wire and the bees who built their comb down from the top bar. Sometimes there's a good sized gap along the side edge or the side bar of the frame that bees use to pass in between. What I've noticed, at least in my hives, is that is a great place to hide queen cells. So that's definitely a location that I keep an eye out for. If you do find queen cells and you're not wanting your bees to swarm, or you don't need those queen cells for any other reason, go ahead and remove those from the frame. And what I like to do is I cut that cell out at the base, because if you just partially cut the cell out, but the larva or the egg remains, they'll just rebuild that cell back around the developing queen, and you won't have taken care of the problem that you thought you had. Another way to prevent swarming is to monitor the colony's population. If you see that the overall population of the hive is booming, like every frame is covered or the majority of frames are covered, you might want to go ahead and make a split. It's a great opportunity to do that. Your other option is to transfer brood frames out of that hive. This is where it helps to have at least one other hive. But this is a good technique to use if you have another hive that's maybe not as strong, they just need a little assistance. You can pull brood frames out of your strong hive and put them in your weaker hive to try and help them out. The other option is to transfer out honey frames. And again, you can transfer honey frames into a colony that may need these resources, or you can pull these frames out and freeze them and use them later on, which we'll talk about. Another option is just to expand the hive. So add a box to the hive. And this will just give the bees more room to explore, gives the queen more space to lay brood or for them to put resources. I want beekeepers to be really careful here though, because I think sometimes we get really excited about our bees and wanting to give them, the opportunity, give them the space so they have the opportunity to build in that space. But sometimes the hive is not strong enough to handle that additional space. So my rule of thumb is if the bees are covering the majority of the frames, so I use Langstroth hives, 10 frame hives. So if I see the bees are covering about 8 frames, I'll go ahead and add another box. I also make my judgment based on how much of those frames are the bees using. Like, is the queen packing in brood there? Have they used the rest of the space for honey and pollen stores? And, if I'm checking all those boxes, then I'm going to go ahead and add another box for them to use. If they are not strong enough for additional space, the population, the workers cannot manage that extra space, and then you can run into some pest issues, specifically small hive beetle. Small hive beetle can use that opportunity to move in because there aren't enough workers to keep them at bay. So just something to keep in mind before you start stacking on boxes to your hive. Okay, so the second one that I want to talk about is assessing your honey and pollen stores in a hive. It's really important for every hive to have both of these resources stored somewhere in the frames. A lot of times, as beekeepers, we get so focused on wanting to produce honey that whenever we open up our colonies, we're quickly assessing, what are the honey stores in my hive? And that's the only thing that we focus on. But I want you to start also looking at what are the pollen stores like in your hives. If there's a lack of pollen stores, that could mean you have a reduction in brood production. They need that pollen. The workers will eat that pollen to produce royal jelly to then feed the larva. If they don't have the pollen, they can't produce royal jelly. And so they cannot, it'll limit the amount of brood that's produced in that colony. If there's a lack of honey stores, the bees are going to have a harder time surviving the times of the year where there are resource dearths. And we tend to think of winter as being that time when there isn't anything around for bees to feed on. And that makes sense. It's cold, there's nothing really growing. Bees are staying inside, they're clustering together, and they, are relying on that honey to stay warm. But this can also happen in the summertime. At least where I'm located, I definitely see this every summer, where there is just nothing out for the bees to go forage on, or there's very little. And so I definitely see them eating through their honey stores in that time of year. So I need to pay attention to what those levels are like and feed them if I need to. A lack of honey stores can also mean starvation for the bees. This typically happens late into the winter if there aren't enough stores for them to survive. And what this looks like is worker bees are dead inside the cells. You just see the ends of their abdomen sticking out. And what they're doing is they're just trying to get any last little bit that there's left, and they end up dying in the cell. So how do we manage this? Every time you open up your hives, I want you to do a quick assessment of the status of both honey stores and pollen stores. Honey, if you're using a Langstroth hive and you've got boxes stacked on top, obviously they're most likely going to be storing their honey on top. And that's a really quick, either looking at a couple frames or assessing by the weight of the box can give you a really good idea of what our stores are like. With pollen, at least what I'm looking for is pollen not only around on the brood frames, but also on the immediate frames surrounding the brood cluster. So this time of year, you're probably seeing a lot of pollen coming in, hopefully. If you're lacking in honey, then feed them with some sugar water. In the spring and the summertime, I like to use a 1-to-1 sugar to water solution, but then I switch to a 2-to-1 sugar water solution in the fall. And in the winter, if the weather's nice enough, warm enough for me to open up a hive. I make that switch because the 2-to-1 solution has less water in it, so it's less work for the bees to dehydrate that solution and store it in their frames. This is where, if you pulled honey frames out during the swarming season, or out of concern of your hive swarming, and froze them, this is where you could pull them back out of the freezer and put them in your hive. So you basically saved them a whole big step right there. If they're lacking in pollen, obviously you can feed them some pollen substitute. There's both dry substitute and pollen patties available to purchase. It's definitely personal preference on which one you go with. But regardless of either one, you just want to be attuned to any sort of pest or disease issues that may come up. With dry substitute, typically that's provided in an open feeding source so that you're not putting it in the hive, and you don't want to put it in the hive because the bees will most likely just drag it out. I think it's trash. So typically dry substitute is provided in an open feeding source But with any sort of open feeding, you can run into some transfer of disease issues. So you just kind of be mindful of that. With pollen patty, you also have to be a little bit careful because with pollen patties, especially in East Texas and Houston, provides a lovely environment for small hive beetles to pop up. And small hive beetles love to lay their eggs in pollen patties. So I personally use pollen patties, and what I do is once I put a patty on, I'll come back 7 days later and check to see if the bees have eaten that patty. If they have, that's great. I'll most likely give them a little bit more. If they haven't, I pull whatever is left, I remove that from the hive and I freeze it for about 48 hours. And the reason I do that is because I want, if any small hive beetle laid eggs in there, or if there's small hive beetle larvae grown in there, the freezing will kill them. And then I'll just reuse that patty later. It's still safe to use. What I also do to try to mitigate this issue is the pollen patties, they're pretty big. So I typically either cut them in half, or if I'm really concerned, I'll cut them in quarter sizes. And just, give each hive a small portion of patty, but still do the same thing, come back 7 days later and just check and go from there. Both are great options. And like I said, both dry and pollen patties are great options for beekeepers. And like I said, it's personal preference on which one you go with. So finally, my last learning opportunity is simply just checking the brood chamber. I've encountered several beekeepers who are hesitant to go down into the brood chamber because they're concerned about disturbing the bees or disturbing the queen. And I tell them, don't worry about it. Get down in there. I want you digging through that brood. And the reason I encourage this is because the brood is where you're going to see most issues pop up relating to honeybee health. First one I have listed is queen quality. So what do we mean by queen quality? Is she behaving like you want your queen to be behaving? Meaning, is she laying? Number one. Number two, is she have a good pattern? Like, is it a good solid pattern or close to solid? And number three, are you seeing brood at different stages of development? And obviously you're not going to see, like in late fall, early winter, you're not going to see, like 6 frames of brood. They're slowing down. They've definitely slowed down by then. But like this time of year, this is where you get an idea of how well your queen is mated, basically. This is where you're also going to see any issues with pests or diseases. They all show up in the brood area. They all have symptoms in the brood. This picture over here, I have, this is a brood frame, and I'm not sure if you can see it very clearly, but these cells that are uncapped, they're uncapped pupa. And whenever, when we're seeing this in a hive, my first jump, or one of my first thoughts, is a concern about a pest or disease issue, specifically varroa mites. You see this symptom frequently with a heavy varroa mite infestation. However, it could also mean that there's not enough pollen in the hive. So these bees are uncapping this brood and eating it so they have protein. Which takes me to my third point. They're resource deficient. So when I see this, I ask myself a lot of questions, or I go through my checklist in my head of things to look for. Number one, probably the most easiest, is let me look at their pollen stores. Do they have enough pollen? If I see they're good on pollen, I'll go ahead and do a varroa shake. I'll see what my varroa levels are, and then go down, from there. because this could just be a hygienic behavior. It couldn't be, it's possible it's not Varroa. It could be another issue. So this is where it really helps as a beekeeper to understand bee biology, but then also these different factors that, you know, can pop up in a beehive, and what does it look like and how is it affecting that colony? Also in the brood, like we talked about before, that's where you're going to see signs of the hive potentially swarming. Like we said, queen cells. That's going to be a big indicator right there. Also, if the queen is out of space, if she's laid in all those cells that she has available, you know, she has no room to lay eggs, then that's going to be a sign to them of like, well, our house is too small now, so we've got to move. So again, this is not, you know, a comprehensive list of the benefits of looking in the brood chamber. But to me, you know, regularly checking the brood in each hive, it will guide how you manage that hive throughout the year, and then determine the overall success of your colony. So to close out, just some resources that I think are you know, really useful to beekeepers. The first one is a website called BMD, kind of like WebMD, but regardless of what you put in, doesn't give you a terrible diagnosis, you know, that you don't want to hear. But it does help beekeepers sort of figure out if there's an issue in the hive. So I encourage you to check that out. It's really fun to play around with, just to kind of see what different results you'll get based on what you select. But then also it can be a really useful in-field tool for beekeepers. If you're in your hive and you're seeing something that you've never seen before, and you want to see if you can figure out, I recommend using this website. The Honeybee Health Coalition, many of you probably have heard about them before because they created the Tools for Varroa Management Guide. If those words do not sound familiar to you, send me an email and I will hook you up with the awesome guide that every beekeeper needs to have in their back pocket. But they also created a document called Best Management Practices. It's a very lengthy document, it's about 80 pages. And it's useful to me, it's useful to any beekeeper, regardless if you're just starting out, or if you don't have bees at all, or you've kept bees for 20 years. It's got a lot of great information in there. Starting off with safety with beekeeping, going down to, you know, these details of queen health and nutrition. So a lot of really good information in there. We have our website, we talked about that. And then the Texas Honeybee Education Association, a few years ago, they put together this pamphlet called A Newbies Guide to Texas Beekeeping. And it's a free resource that it talks about beekeeping in Texas, but then it has each season and a checklist for, you know, what you should be thinking about or paying attention to, or what your hive may be doing that time of year. So I love that because, you know, it kind of gets you in a frame of mind of, you know, beekeeping for each season, and then but also looking ahead. You should always be looking ahead down the year of what's coming up or what could potentially happen 3 months down the line. So I encourage you to check that out. And I guess that's it. So I want to thank all of you for allowing me to chat tonight. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, etc., that's our contact information for our office. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary. What questions do you guys have for Mary? And it's kind of like open season. What questions do you have for her today?
We have one question in the chat room, which, Mary, what areas of Texas have the most beekeepers?
That's a good question. So East Texas, north to south, is really popular for beekeeping. Most of our commercial beekeepers operate in that part of Texas. It just has a lot of great natural resources for them to use, a lot of space. So yeah, this time of year, there are bees all over the place on that part of the state.
Can you maybe tell us a little bit about the Master Beekeeper Program?
Yeah, I did a pretty quick overview for that. It's pretty straightforward. The requirements for, well, okay, the first step is to take the apprentice level exam. And the requirements for that is to have at least 1 year of beekeeping, and it doesn't have to be the most immediate year. It could have been, you know, your 1 year of beekeeping 10 years ago, and that works for us. But then also be registered with my office. And then from there, we typically hold exam sessions twice a year, once in the spring, which the spring session is this week, but then again in the fall. And normally we have in-person sessions, but because of COVID, we had to cancel last year's, or spring 2020, we had to cancel, but the fall session and this upcoming session is virtual, which I hopefully has been helpful to beekeepers, because less travel. Texas is a big state, and I never feel good about somebody who has to drive, 8 hours just to come take an exam. So, yeah.
How many people do we have, like, is apprentice master beekeepers versus advanced versus the full-blown?
Oh, that's a good question. That if I should know this stuff off the top of my head. We have over 20 beekeepers who have achieved the master level. We have not had anybody, the farthest you can go is master craftsman, and we haven't had anybody test for that level yet. I have 2 beekeepers that are very interested in doing that as soon as possible. But in the program overall, we've had almost 400 beekeepers, or a little over 400 beekeepers, take at least the apprentice level exam. Oop, I had a question come through to me. The question is, as a backyard beekeeper, do you need a permit to move bees from one county to an adjoining county? So technically in Texas, if you're moving bees across county lines, you do need what we call an intrastate permit. It's an annual permit that covers any movements that a beekeeper does throughout our fiscal year, which is September 1st to August 31st of the following year. $35 for it. If you're a beekeeper that owns 12 or fewer colonies, and you're doing that type of movements, you still need the permit, but the application fee is waived. I hope that answers that question.
Mary, I had a question. As a inspection service as well, are you seeing any trends when it comes to, diseases out in the field? Any areas where you've seen more or less, especially here in the Gulf Coast region?
Yeah, so the disease issues that we see them more tied with season rather than location. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's kind of tied to location because a lot of these diseases show up in moist environments, cool, moist environments. So in the springtime, we do see some chalk brood pop up during our inspections. It's a funky disease, meaning it makes what we call mummies. So it's a fungus that takes over the larva that's developing and turns it into a mummy. And that usually comes up if there's not good air circulation in the hive. So it's not a problematic disease. I mean, the infection can get really bad if it's not handled. But a quick solution, if you're seeing some signs of chalk root, is just to crack your lid slightly. So like stick a pencil or a small stick in between the lid and the top box. And that'll provide enough airflow through the colony. Open up your entrances. If you have a screen bottom board, that provides great ventilation. We also in the springtime see European foul brood show up, which it's not, it's a bacterial disease like American foul brood, but it's not as terrible a situation as American foul brood can be. For American foul brood, there's no treatment if a hive becomes symptomatic. With European foul brood, beekeepers have options on getting that out of your hive.
Great. We have another question in the chat box, and it is, what is the strangest or most unique inspection or call you've received?
I don't want to bring up the call because I don't think that's appropriate to share on it. I've gotten some weird calls, that's for sure. But the most unique inspection. That's a hard one, I guess, because, you know, every beekeeper that I've visited has always been so pleasant. I mean, the beekeepers are some of the most laid back people you'll ever meet, and they're great. But I guess like probably there was one time when I was doing an inspection out in West Texas, and the beekeeper took me to several different yards, and I think that the yards definitely had mesquite trees. And then you know how mesquite gets those big thorns on them?
Yeah.
Well, the next morning I woke up to a flat tire on my truck because I think I rolled over a mesquite thorn and it popped my tire. I mean, fortunately I made it back to where I was staying, but I was like 50 miles from the closest town. Like I was in the middle of nowhere. The beekeeper was kind enough to spend his whole morning like taking me into town to get my tire fixed and, you know, helping me get it back on my truck. And then as I'm leaving again, another tire gets a hole. And so he helps me, you know, put my spare on my tire. And then the whole drive to the closest town, I had like a satellite GPS that I was watching because I didn't even have cell phone reception. And I was just counting down the miles, and I was like, okay, 10 miles. I can walk 10 miles. You know, how hard is that? Like if I get another flat tire, because that's my luck, you know, anyway, that's probably the most
Unique,
dramatic inspection I've ever done.
All right. Let's see. One other question from Joseph Laffey. Do you know of any Texas beekeeping programs with certifications like Hives, Heroes to Hives from Michigan State, but open to everyone?
Nothing immediately comes to mind. In Texas, probably the closest thing is going to be our Master Beekeeper Program. I often hesitate to call it a certification program because I don't want people to get the idea that just because you've gone through the Master Beekeeper Program doesn't necessarily make you a better beekeeper than someone who hasn't. There's a lot of great beekeepers out there who have no interest in that sort of program. The only certification programs that come to mind are those ones that are, you know, quote unquote exclusive, where you have to like travel to another state and pay a bunch of money, you know, to take their exams. I'll have to think about that one though, Joseph. That's a really great question.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question from Kyle, our secretary. Do you have any ideas on the Apis introduction to control Chinese tallow? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan, just because I'm no expert in this level that they're dealing with, but when you're thinking about introducing a exotic species to control another species, and you're not really sure how that's all going to work out. That makes me nervous. I've definitely been, like, my office has been called from senator offices and the Department of Agriculture with questions about how this would affect the apiary industry. And we've had some long conversations about, you know, the loss of Chinese tallow, even the dramatic reduction of Chinese tallow, and the hugely negative impacts that would have on our beekeepers here. But in conclusion, what I'll say with this, I know that the comment period is closing soon. Mm-hmm. If you have thoughts and feelings about this, I encourage you to submit your response. And rather than just saying, no, this is a terrible idea, or yes, this is a great idea, you know, however you feel, to provide some constructive criticism, provide them information, because that's what they're looking for. The document that they created is just a draft. Mm-hmm. It's not the final decision. They're just using this comment period to gather more information. So yeah, I encourage anybody to respond.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. No matter what your opinion, at least get your comment in there and share what you think and the pros and cons. Absolutely.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right. Well, you know, Mary, honestly, can't thank you enough for joining us today and sharing all your local knowledge and, of course, the Master Beekeeper Program. As you can see, many of us are apprentices. Not all of us have made it to the higher levels, but we definitely are, you know, working that way.
Well, it was my pleasure. And like, again, to all of you, I really appreciate the time. And if you ever need anything beekeeping, honeybee related, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to us. That is why we are here. Great, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mary.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to Joe to share with us the special picks for our virtual door prizes. And today we're giving away some recommended reading from HBA based on kind of our learning opportunities today. So here's some books that we picked out to be able to ship directly to you as our winners. So Joe?
Okay, and these books aren't exactly random. These are the 4 books they recommend that you read to do the Master Beekeeper Program. So these came straight off of Mary's website. Mm-hmm. So our first winner tonight is Matt Borman. And so you can pick any one of the 4 books. And if all 3 winners want to pick the same book, that's fine too. So
Matt, are you on there?
Yeah, I'm on. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for, this is a nice surprise. This is my first meeting to join. So I appreciate y'all welcoming me. Actually, I recently bought the Beekeeper's Handbook. So, I mean, I'm open to the other 3, whichever y'all recommend. I'll gladly accept.
They're all good. They're all good. So just, you know, I'll send you a note after.
Okay.
And then we can figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Next winner is D. Hardiman. I don't know if D's still on.
Hi, thank you. That's exciting. I had to figure out how to unmute myself. I'm not sure which books I have in the library, but I'm pretty sure we don't have honeybee biology and beekeeping.
Okay.
That's a good one.
But thank you so much. I'm excited.
Okay, great. I will send you an email for all the winners. I'm gonna send you all an email and get your mailing address because I'll have it shipped by Amazon straight to your house. So, okay. And then our third winner is Nancy Robinson.
Wow, thank you. I would like first lessons in beekeeping.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, you know, I'm never going to leave empty-handed. Always get something from the meeting. Knowledge, or sometimes even an extra book. All right. Well, thank you all. And so glad for you guys who have won a book. We can't wait to hear about it. We hope you read it and give us the notes how much you enjoyed it. And of course, our next meeting is coming up in May 18th. And so as we get closer, we'll share with you the upcoming speakers. And just a little forward thinking, you know, as we're coming back together across the state, we will be looking at our opportunities in the upcoming months to come together and seeing each other in person. So be looking out from the SCEP and other messages through Facebook of when we'll be back in together, so we can actually do this all in person again in Houston. So thank you all for joining today. Thank you, board, Joe, Kyle, and Laura. Thank you so much for helping us host this. And you guys have a wonderful week. And of course, give us a call if you need anything. Thank you, guys.